Welcome to the Emerging Civil War podcast. I'm Chris Mikowski, and joining me today is Dr. Al Nofi to talk a little bit today about his edited book, Fred Grant at Vicksburg. Al, how are you today?
Very good. It's an absolutely beautiful day here. We're having a sort of early fall day for some reason, which is better than the heat wave we had a couple of weeks ago.
Oh gosh, yeah, it's nice to finally have a hint of fall in the air. We're recording
Yes,
this the last week of August, and finally getting that little hint of autumn. So, and you're zooming in from Brooklyn, as I recall, correct?
yes, yes.
Yeah, very good. So, has it been a, decent summer in the city?
We had 2 weeks where we had like 3 or 4 days in a row in the 90s. Mostly it's been good. We were a little short of rain, but we had a lot of rain earlier in the year, so our reservoirs are still where they should be
Oh, good.
this time of year, which is good. And this, of course, is the 249th anniversary of the Battle of Brooklyn. Yesterday, I,
Yeah,
I went to the observances over the weekend uh, at the Old Stone House, where the famous Maryland 400 saved the Revolution,
right.
mostly getting killed, but
Yeah,
and we had a nice spread, and then we ended up at a American Legion post where the liquid refreshments were apparent.
oh, very good, very good. Well, you want to toast to the memory of the Patriots, so that's good.
Yes, yes.
Yeah, very good. Well, we're talking a bit today about your new book that you have edited called Fred Grant at Vicksburg, available from Savis Beatty. And this tells the story of Ulysses S. Grant's oldest son, Fred, as he accompanies his dad on campaign during the Civil War. And why don't you tell us a little bit about why you thought this was a story worth bringing to wider attention?
Uh, to begin with, I knew nothing about Fred Grant. I mean, I vaguely knew, that Sam had a couple of sons and a daughter, so. Uh, but every once in a while, reading a book about Vicksburg, there'd be someone would quote Fred Grant, and in fact, it was I can't remember the Vicksburg book that Ted issued just 2 or 3 years ago. Um, Professor Short's, I think it was one of his early, but anyway, I spotted it in there at that point, and I said, this is an interesting little anecdote. So I love anecdotes. So I made a note of where he found it and looked it up, and I found this speech that he'd made at a reunion of the Army of Tennessee, the Army of the Tennessee, and like 4 or 5 thousand words, and a lot of interesting observations and anecdotes about being a 12-year-old kid living free. He's not, for the most part, not anywhere near his dad. For most of the 3 months, uh, and so I began to look for more, and it turned out, all right, I found 12, I think 12 different versions of this speech.
Oh, okay.
All about 4 or 5 thousand words, um, and a couple of conversations with journalists in which he makes a few more. And then I ran across the 18 odd thousand words that were published by the National Tribune, uh, which was a continuous account of his adventures. Uh, and I read it through, and this is worth having. This is worth reading for people. I mean, how many people ran across, one of Grant's things and said, "Oh, this is a nice anecdote," and didn't realize there's all this other stuff out there. I'm sure there's stuff I didn't find. I mean, because there was some, I couldn't find every year's issue of the, reunion acta of the Army of the Tennessee, for example. I only found 2 or 3. Um, and then I was restricted in the fact that some of the stuff I could not physically get hold of. And then as a 12-year-old kid, I'm thinking this, I'm thinking back, this, imagine being a 12-year-old kid in the Army. It's like wow, um, this is an adventure that we all would probably want to have had. Uh, so I read through it and the long version, and I began to think about annotating it and seeing what happens. And I began to notice, for example, that Fred makes some mistakes, and he admits at one point in one of his reminiscences that he never looked anything up. So he gets people's names wrong. In one very egregious case, he the gunboats ran the batteries to prove that it could be done. And then 2 or 3 nights later, the transports ran the batteries. Well, he's lumped them together as one episode,
Uh-huh.
you know. And then he leaves out stuff that I found in other places. Like he mentions watching the gunboats running the batteries. He doesn't mention that his mother, his 2 brothers, his baby sister were there, along with General McClernand's new wife, and that his youngest brother is terrified of the noise. So, what's his name? Wilson, the later cavalry guy,
Yeah, James Wilson.
yeah, is bouncing the kid up and down on his knee while they're watching this action, and they're under fire. I mean, he doesn't mention that. Um, he mentions a lot of interesting anecdotes and a lot of interesting people. Um, his the fact that, for example, there was a black man who pointed out that the best place to land, once they gotten down behind the batteries, was Bruinsburg. And of course, the man's name is not known, which was standard policy when you got information from a black person,
Right.
because you didn't want to mention, to come back and haunt them, which is why you get phrases like an intelligent contraband, which sounds like a put down, but it's really saying this is a reliable informant, you know. Uh, then there's other guys. There was this interesting sergeant that he mentions, who later ended up going to West Point. Grant wanted to promote him on the spot, and he said, "No, could you give me an appointment to West Point?" Just like, and then this guy who was cooking for General Sherman. I'm terrible at remembering things, can't remember his name, but who also sang this song, Old Shady, about a freedman, a man who has run away from slavery, which is in the book. So there's that. There's little anecdotes about, for example, he mentions that he's following the army and he's following the wagon train. He's going with the wagon train. And he mentions that he basically sees a cow and a mule yoked together to a non-standard wagon, not an army wagon, hauling the wagon. So there's I literally have never, whenever you see a description of the supply train, they're always talking about, the 6 mule wagons and, so on. No, Grant is living off the land. He's gathering what he can, and he's, what happens if your wagon breaks down and so on. That is something I've never seen anywhere. Um, right early, almost literally the first day that he gets there on March 29th or 30th and whatnot. They're on the gunboat Benton where he meets Admiral Porter, and he has some good stuff to say about Admiral Porter.
Yeah.
And then they go to a demonstration of the coffee mill gun, and, the Union repeating gun. It was
like a super early version of the Gatling gun kind of thing.
It was like a one-barrel Gatling gun.
Yeah.
And Gatling actually was inspired by that and by somebody else's volley gun, which was never actually built. A volley gun is just a bunch of barrels that are loaded and then discharged all at once. and there were several designed around the Civil War, and they would have magazines. So you would unscrew the magazine and screw in a new one, and then you'd fire it and you'd unscrew. Now this is going to give you like up to 80 barrels they had in some cases. This is going to give you a hell of a lot of firepower. But then you have to change the barrel, and by the way, who cleans the barrels?
Yeah.
But anyway, so they're watching the test of this cranking, thing, and there's a video of it, and the link for the video is in the book. And there's a misfire. One of the rounds explodes, and Grant is wounded. He's hitting the thumb. And Fred says it gave his father trouble for several weeks. I went and looked. I could not find any place ever, any book about Grant that mentions this incident.
Mm.
Even, some guy published 2-volume medical histories of the Union and Confederate generals. Not in there.
Mm. Wow.
Grant doesn't mention it in his memoirs.
No.
He doesn't mention it in his letters home. But imagine, if it could have hit him in the face, hit him in the eye, instead of it hit him in the thumb.
Yeah.
This little incident that could arguably have totally changed history. And it's just a little anecdote from Fred. And then he has observations about many of the generals. He was greatly impressed by John Logan. And everybody thinks the nickname is Blackjack, and apparently his troops called him Fighting Jack.
Oh, okay.
He was also very impressed with McPherson and Sherman. He really was impressed by Admiral Porter. There's some anecdotes and whatnot about Admiral Porter that are very good. One of the things
I love that. I love that story when he goes above on the Benton right after Grand Gulf and he sees the scene of carnage.
Yes.
And Porter's like, "Hey, you want to stay on the ship with me?" And and Fred's kind of green at the gills, and he's like, I don't think my dad would let me because he's so grossed out."
Yeah. One of the things that we could not do, the 4 sections that make up the main memoir were published every other once a week for 4 weeks in the National Journal, and each section was accompanied by little woodcuts.
Okay.
And they're marvelous, but there was no way we could get copies that could be reproduced because they were on PDF, and they were reproduced from a newspaper, and they're woodcuts, but they're marvelous. Like the little anecdote about when he was in the gunboat after his mother put him on the gunboat, and he's coming down from Memphis, and there's at a place where the Confederates would occasionally put a battery. They couldn't put one there permanently because the Grant would send troops, and in fact, eventually Sherman's corps occupied the hill when he was forming the screen against Johnston. So they're steaming down the way, and there is they spot a Confederate battery up there. So somebody tells him, better get on the cover, kid, and there's some rounds firing. So there's this, the way the Navy stacks rope, in nice, neat coils. So he jumps into one of these coils, and they safely go behind it. And then some officer comes over to him and says, kid, if they'd hit our boiler, your mother wouldn't have anything to find from you. And there's a little cartoon of this in there, as there are of when he's on the, I think it's Grand Gulf, Porter's been wounded in the back of the head, and he's standing using his sword as a cane while he's talking to Grant, big smile on his face and all, and the kid is impressed. And there's a picture of that, and there's pictures of some of the generals and pictures of Fred hiding from his father because he's not supposed to be where he is. After Grand Gulf, Grant leaves him on the gunboat, while he goes off to fight, to follow the troops. And Fred sneaks ashore. He hustles General Thomas, Lorenzo Thomas, and he sneaks ashore, and he ends up, at the battle. So he's hiding behind the tree.
And he basically talks during that period about how like he kind of stayed away from headquarters and kind of stuck with the troops for those
Yeah,
couple of weeks. Yeah.
yeah, yeah. Well, he also said his father's mess was terrible. He said his father only had one good meal the whole campaign, and okay, I can't remember which battle after, but they came upon a plantation house, and clearly the table was laid with fine linen and plenty of food and and everybody had fled. I mean, because they were obviously Confederates, and um, so they all sat down and had this sumptuous meal. And that he said that was the only good meal his father had the whole time.
Yeah.
But he shared meals on several occasions with the troops,
They,
and
they were out foraging, so had kind of some better pickings now and then.
yeah, yeah. Um, and um, and of course, on more than one occasion, he talks about the effect of the dead. Grand Gulf, of course, but also, oh God, I can't remember what battle where he finds himself, and there's just dead bodies. The wounded have been removed, but he's there, and and he passes by the tents where the surgeons are at work, and he's watching, and he sits down on a log, and he admits that he's like the most. He says was the most woe-begotten 12-year-old in America.
Yeah.
I can imagine, sure, the shock of this. He doesn't mention that he was carrying a pistol except once, and I can't find out how tall he was. But at one point, towards the end of the campaign, he's down with dysentery, and he was shot, and his wound was not healing well, so he's stuck with his dad. But he said he lost weight, and he was down to 68 pounds. He said he lost like 30 or 40 pounds, something like that. He says. So for a 12-year-old to be about 110, 120 pounds, I'm not sure. That's probably he's probably a little tall.
Yeah.
And he's wearing he's wearing an army tunic and whatnot. And at some point, some of the troops have pinned the captain's, bars on him. So he could easily have been, taken for a combatant and shot.
Yeah.
And he is almost captured a couple of times. He's in one very, he falls in with one of his father's orderlies. And it must have been a very young orderly, because they spot some horses tied up outside a house. And they figure, they go back, going back and forth, and they're, let's steal horses. Why stop with the horses? Let's take them prisoner. So it's the guy's got to be, the soldier's got to be young. So they mount up, and they're riding towards the place, and then they're talking and say, wait a minute, they may capture us. Well, it's too late. We have to, we can't, obviously they're making noise, run, and the noise attracts the guys in the house. Turns out they're Union guys. So another occasion, he's trying to steal honey, and they think better of it, He
Well,
does.
and I think about that instance where he is going into Jackson, Mississippi, and
Yes,
finds himself surrounded by some Confederates, and he's so muddy that they don't recognize him as a Union
yeah,
soldier because he looks so bedraggled, and so he's able
yeah,
to escape capture then too.
yeah. And of course, he liberates the governor's mansion. He actually asks it's in one of the footnotes when he has a conversation about his father, saying that he should be given credit for liberating the governor's mansion, because he mentions that in one of his other accounts. I guess if I was really careful, I could have melded them together, but I didn't want to mess with it too much.
Well, and I kind of like the approach you took, where like here's the big long memoir that he
Yeah,
wrote for the National Tribune, and then your footnotes I think do a really nice job of sort of interjecting these additional episodes or facts from various speeches that he gave. So I mean,
yeah,
like as an editor, I thought you did real good service to the manuscript in that regard.
yeah. Are you the one who's responsible for what I think is the best thing that was done to the book?
I'm not sure.
When
I'll take credit, maybe.
when I finished it, I had an introduction, then the background on the Grant family, then his early war adventures, then the memoir, and then what happened afterwards. And I don't know who did it, but someone said put all that in the second half of the book and just put the memoir right up there in the beginning. And that was the way to do it. Yes, that was the
Yeah.
way to do it.
I
Uh,
don't think that honestly, I don't think that was me, but
it must have been Ted then.
yeah, it could have been Ted. It could have been
Yeah.
Ted. It's
It,
like I like the structure of the book a lot though, because you let Grant speak for himself, Fred speak for himself, and then you sort of like offer these great little explanations and corrections.
yeah.
Let me ask you along those lines: is Fred Grant a reliable narrator overall?
I would say yes. He does, I mean, he makes mistakes that are memory mistakes, you know. But in
Which, like to
general,
me, is ironic because like one of his jobs later in life was to be a fact checker for his dad when his
yeah,
dad was doing his memoirs, um,
I guess
and
he was
he
just
didn't do
tired.
that for himself. Yeah,
Yeah. Um, but yeah, I thought it was reliable. He points out a lot of little trivial things that uh, you know, in passing, like the joke about the horse. The horse was rolling around in the mud, and the writer said, and everybody, so some of the troops went to rescue the horse, and the guy said, no, 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 and someone else said, uh, your horse is worth 1,200 bucks now. I could not find that anecdote. What the heck is this about 1,200 bucks, right? Friend of mine, who just recently passed away, he was in his 90s, professor of physics, but he had an eidetic memory. He never forgot anything. I mean, um, he grew up on a farm in Iowa. And it turns out that there's this kind of old folk thing that if your horse displays a lot of playfulness, he's really worth more
oh,
because
okay.
he's a spirited horse. And that's why one of the officers says, hey, your horse is, every turn you're worth 100 bucks more. Um, you know, one of the things I taught history on pretty much every level from fifth grade up, right? And the hardest thing is to try to get people to understand those people were modern,
Yeah.
where they were, it was modern. This was it. I mean, yeah, the milk goes sour in 5 minutes because they don't have a refrigerator, but that's okay. The train brings the milk.
Yeah.
It also brings all this smoke and dust and whatnot. But that was modern. Just like 100 years from now, they're going to look at us and say, God, they were so filthy and stupid, and that book that Fred's comments bring out, this he's not in awe of the fact that there's a train or a bridge. It's commonplace to us. It's like, wow, they had that this bridge there and railroad. We're saying, gee, that's pretty advanced for those days. And no, it was commonplace.
Yeah.
And
That's what everyday life looked like for them. Yeah.
yeah, um, like he never mentions taking a bath. I'm sure they didn't take him very often. Uh, I think I can recall in all the reading I've done about the Civil War, I can recall only one person commenting on the smell of the army as it passed by.
So that was a detail that struck out for me with Ulysses S. Grant when Grant Gulf finally falls. He goes there, and the first thing he does is take a bath and get a clean change of clothes because he said he'd been separated from his officer's trunk for a couple weeks by that
Yeah,
point.
yeah, yeah.
But
He has to borrow underwear from somebody. I footnoted that because I knew nobody would understand what it meant by he borrowed some linen.
yeah, yeah,
The tablecloth and napkins and whatnot. No, it's underwear. Um, yeah, little things like that.
yeah.
Um,
So let me ask you this: is because Fred becomes a very popular speaker on the speaker circuit, and he's talking to all these different places, and by that point he's well into middle age, and so this is a little bit like I always refer to it as like Bruce Springsteen glory days, kind of talking
yeah.
about the good old times and stuff, and so he seems to be having a good time going around in his middle age, sharing these stories from when he was a kid.
Well, the veterans of the Army of Tennessee counted him as a veteran and as a member of the club. They listed him on monuments,
Yeah.
you know. So that was certainly something, and he graduated from West Point. Um, he saw action in the Indian Wars several occasions, but being Grant's son, he also had some bennies. So when was it Sherman made a tour of the of Italy, the south of France. I'm sorry, Spain, Italy, the south of France, all the way to the Ottoman Empire, then by land through Austria back to France and whatnot. So he went as a second lieutenant, uh, as Sherman's age, and later on he was kicked up to lieutenant colonel staff.
Uh,
So he never served as a captain or a major,
uh, uh,
Um, and but he was doing working for his dad at the time. So uh, then he resigned from the army about 1878 or 79. Help his father then write his memoirs. I went into business. Um, when the Spanish-American War broke out, he was living in New York. Um, he was apparently active. He wasn't active in the. Actually, I never even thought to check that. I think he was a member of Squadron A for a while. Squadron A is the New York National Guard
mm.
Cavalry, which is now the 1st Battalion of the 101st
Yeah,
Cavalry.
'cause I think that's what helps him keep his sort of status so that when he does get reactivated, he's able to keep his rank and all
Yeah,
that. Yeah.
yeah. He was briefly colonel of the 14th Brooklyn when the Spanish-American War broke out, but was almost immediately promoted to Brigadier General of Volunteers. He didn't see action in Cuba, uh, but he was a military governor, I think, of Puerto Rico for a while.
Hmm.
Uh, and then he was shipped to the Philippines, where he commanded an infantry brigade that included the 25th Infantry. So I think there was one white regiment and one black regiment. And there's video of that. The link is in the book, um, which is impressive.
Yeah.
And he was then promoted to brigadier general in the regular army. And I think in 1905 or 1906. And then shortly after he was major, about 1905 or 1906, he was promoted to major general. And he died in 1912. He was the second ranking officer in the army
Uh,
and commanded the Eastern Department, so basically everything east of the Mississippi.
yeah.
Um, and he had 2 children. His daughter married a Russian prince. Not bad. The Tanner's granddaughter marrying the Russian prince, right? And she actually wrote several books about the Tsarist court. His name was Katakouzine, and I was not able to figure out. He must be related. There were 2 naval officers, or admirals in the U.S. Navy, Russian descent, named Katakouzine, and I could never figure out it. I couldn't find any genetic connections. His son USG the third, was West Point with I think MacArthur's the same year as MacArthur. Uh, he's an engineer, so he was mostly staff time. And I think he ended up as an advisor to the Supreme War Council in World War One. In the 1920s, the White House was originally had an attic, and during the Coolidge years, there were some problems. So he was assigned to do some repairs, to the building and turn the attic into another floor. And it turned out that was not well done. Which is why in 1940, whatever, Margaret Truman's piano
Yeah.
fell through the floor there, and they had to literally gut the building. So there are no ghosts living in the building because they had no place to live for 4 years or 5 years. And by the way, the floor layout is much different.
Yeah.
The physical space, so to speak, by longitude, latitude, and altitude, that was the room that Harrison died in, President
Yeah.
Harrison died in, and later Lincoln, what's his name, Tad.
Tad. Yeah.
That physical space is now occupied by a breakfast room.
Okay.
But it's not the same room. During World War II, he was deputy director of civil defense under LaGuardia. LaGuardia was director of civil defense. And then for the first 2 or 3 years of the Bicentennial Commission, he was honorary president of the Bicentennial.
Of the Centennial, the Civil War Centennial Commission.
Yeah. Oh, and there's a great anecdote connected to that. It seems that it's mentioned in one of the footnotes. It seems that during his adventures at one place, Fred found the children's Bible in some plantation house. So he took it and wrote in it, that this was for his baby sister. And just a few days later, he gets wounded at the Battle of the Big Black River, which is
and thinks he's dying.
And thinks he's dying. Yeah. The funniest thing is he doesn't mention it in the long memoir. It mentions in the others when Colonel what's his name comes over to check him out. He says, "I'm dying," and the general says, "No." And in the memoir he says the general went to look, and in the other memoir he says, doubting my wisdom or something, goes to look, and apparently he had an injury about a dime's worth of flesh wound,
Yeah.
which he neglected. So he became infected apparently, but he was lucky.
Yeah.
But at Battle of the Big Black River, he lost the book. Right? Okay. When his son is president of the, honorary president of the Centennial Commission, he receives this Bible from a woman. Someone in her family found it.
Oh, wow.
And kept it and decided to send it in. I found one picture of it, and it was not possible to reproduce it. It was so badly, but talk about a coincidence,
Wow.
And so there was still his inscription, and on the other side, somebody had written, found on the battlefield that, so on. Yeah. When we teach history, we have to talk about all these great issues and topics and things, right? And there's all this great fun stuff.
Yeah. That
we can't talk about because we have tests to take and and interviews, and which is unfortunate. There was one or two during his adventures. Fred had interactions with many Black people. some of the terms he uses are would be considered at least mildly offensive now, but in his day were relatively, I mean, Negro was not insulting,
Right.
you know. Um, so it's a little tricky. Uh, he doesn't use the words that were even then bad,
Right.
Um, but he says some interesting things. Uh, in the memoir, he mentions Milken's Bend,
Hmm.
and he ends his comment about the battle by saying, that this proved that black men were willing to fight for their freedom. So, I forget the exact words. Well, the memoir was republished some years later by the Sons of Confederate Veterans. And funny thing about it, his comments on the Battle of Milliken's Bend end before that sentence.
Uh,
So we all really know what the war was about.
yeah, right.
Uh,
Jeez.
um, yeah, there's that, a number of little throws light. He talks about going into a town newly liberated, and people are just ecstatic. You know, I mean, they literally think the army is here just to free them.
Mm.
Uh, you
It
know,
and it seems to me that he's really he has a chance to really have his eyes opened on a lot of different things, and that
yeah.
goes from these interactions with these enslaved folks to wounded soldiers and the gore on the battlefield to just you know kind of de-romanticizing what war is all about. But then we see him kind of telling this from the vantage point of a middle-aged man. So, like, do you think the memoir captures that sense of epiphany, that sense of insight that he gains, or is it kind of clouded by his ability to kind of look at all that through hindsight, do you think?
Uh, hmm. He doesn't sugarcoat what he saw,
Yeah.
you know. And he talks about the mud and being hungry, and where in middle age he might have, so that was etched in his memory. He uh, I think he becomes a little hardened by the end of his time there, because he doesn't. He's at some places where things happen, and like he has an anecdote about when they set off a mine, um, and Confederates were digging a countermine, uh, and the men that were digging the mine were flung into the air. One of them was a black man. The others were all white Confederates. He was the only survivor, and he's he just says it as a matter of fact thing. He doesn't say, this is just amazing, but yeah, I think he doesn't sugarcoat most of what is happening.
Yeah.
And being 12, you know, I think stuff went by him
Yeah.
too. In the footnote, after no, here he is. He's lost a lot of weight. In fact, he almost dies by the end of the year. He gets so sick. Um, but he mentions staying at the Lim House. I found a diary of some woman who was with the Lim family, and she mentions that he became friendly with the Lim children and allowed one of the daughters to ride his horse. And one of the threads that goes through the whole thing is his horse. He has to have a horse. Which is interesting. There's another anecdote. The Lim family had a northern woman as the tutor for their children, and she ends up marrying one of Grant's generals.
What kind of education is someone getting there? It's
It's it's just these wonderful little things. And one of the things I found, I just realized, Fred was not the only child of a general in the war or even in the campaign. One of the other generals had a younger son that was there.
yeah,
Sherman had his son with him at one point in the war, and I think he died. The kid died of disease.
yeah.
Um, and I started making a list of generals who went, uh, and I came up with a half a dozen without even trying. Just when I was paying attention. Um, Rufus King, he organized the Iron Brigade.
Yep.
His son Charles, hung around his headquarters for a while, and Rufus got him an appointment to West Point. I'm sure to keep him out of trouble. So he
Right.
graduated in '67
Right.
or '66 or '67. I can't remember. He, of course, is Charles King is arguably one of the last Civil War soldiers on active duty. He remained active in the Minnesota, I think, or Michigan National Guard through World War One. In fact, after World War One,
Well,
because the army wouldn't relieve him because all these guys. He wrote books,
yeah.
adventure stories about, and many of them ended up in movies.
Yeah.
John Ford movies. You could have cast it out of his books. Amazing. But that was something that was surprising me. Although thinking back a generation or two earlier, especially in European armies, was not unusual for generals to have their young kids,
Right.
around, even uniformed, and with rank. Even though they're just hanging around with dad, they're learning the ropes.
Well, and that reminds me, like when Julia first asks Grant about having Fred go on campaign, she says like Alexander was that
Yes,
age when he was going out with Philip,
yeah,
and that
and
was one of her
she is
justifications.
one heck of a mother. Yeah, take him to war. So what if he's 12? Um, and even Grant himself, I'm surprised. He begins his wartime career, so to speak, Fred, by accompanying his dad to Springfield, where his dad is taking command of the I forget what regiment now, and he follows the troops around for several weeks. Dad got him a pony. He loved it. The troops called him the Little Colonel, so the troops liked him. That's one of the threads through it. I noticed whenever he encounters the troops, it's a very friendly thing, as opposed to who is this kid. Um, and then the regiment gets ready to. There's word that there's going to be a Confederate attack across the Mississippi from Missouri into Illinois, and the regiment is ordered there. Grant sends him home, and subsequently writes, "I regret sending him home."
Yeah.
Oh, and the going home, Grant puts him on a train, and he's got to change trains in order to get to Galena. When he gets to where he's supposed to change trains, his train is late and the other train is left. So he walks 18 miles to Galena. It's a 12-year-old kid. I mean, 12-year-old kid today walking to the corner.
Yeah, pretty
and
incredible.
and in their letters, Mrs. Grant doesn't even say by the way, you know, he walked here, She just says, "Oh, Fred arrived," and elsewhere we learned that he walked 18 miles.
Yeah.
18 miles is, what, easily a steady 8 hours walking.
Yeah.
You got to take a little rest. So, and on his little 12-year-old feet too, and God knows what kind of shoes he's wearing.
Yeah. Right.
Yeah. And one of the things that I just like the people he's introduced me to so many people.
Yeah. And there's a section of the book that talks about people mentioned in the text, and you go
Yeah.
in and provide some background information. The book also offers some places mentioned in the text, and you explain some of those. So, again, I think that you really served the memoir well by providing a lot of that ancillary information that fills it out.
Yeah, well, a lot of those places are gone.
Yeah,
I mean, we talk about Civil War battles and whatnot, and sometimes don't realize that the place the battle happened to at isn't there anymore.
right.
It's a nice park, yeah, because it was abandoned a long time ago.
Yeah.
Um, some of the people I really find interesting. He's there when Grant meets. Oh God, I can't forget the guy's name now. There was a Union agent who infiltrated Johnston's headquarters as a Confederate officer. And Fred is there when he brings Johnston's orders to, what's his name?
Oh,
Confederate
McPherson.
commander.
Oh, to when he's talking back and forth to Pemberton.
Pemberton, yeah, to Pemberton. To join with him. I suspect Johnson is trying to to save the army and screw the city. But he brings those orders to Grant. So I looked the guy up a little bit. Whoa, he spent most of the war as a spy.
Yeah.
And I don't mean just walking around, in civilian clothes. I mean, he's wearing a Confederate uniform. Then there's at the end, he doesn't actually stay with the army anymore after leaving Vicksburg in mid-July, but he comes to visit on several occasions.
Right. He shows up at City Point on a couple of
Yeah, he
occasions.
shows up at City Point a couple of times, and then in the spring, just before Appomattox, I guess, he's at City Point, and he wants to go fishing, so he goes fishing with Grant's or with this black man who had been the servant of several officers and finally ended up with Grant. Um, and he's wearing his school uniform. The book cover is the school uniform, a private school, I think, in Covington, Kentucky. And so they're fishing in the James River, and of course, a bunch of Union, troops spot them and assume they're spies. And like it took them a while to convince them who they were, and you can see what history would have been like if Fred had been spontaneously hung as a spy. Um, oh yeah, talk about captured. At one point, while he's with his dad, he gets sick, and he sends him to his mom, to not to his mom, but to another woman in Kentucky, in Covington. And it turns out that there are Confederate sympathizers all around, and they find out he's there. And the woman discovers that they're going to try and kidnap him. And she literally puts him on the train back to Vicksburg because it was safer.
Wow.
These,
It's the thing I love about this book is that, really like at 12 years old, this is the perfect
my hay
age.
fever is killing me here.
Oh, no, that's right. It's at 12 years old, it's the perfect age to have a boy's adventure,
Yeah.
and sort of that stereotypical, glorious, fantastic, oh my gosh, the adventure of a lifetime. Um, and the book captures that. And I think you as an editor do a nice job of sort of contextualizing that to kind of keep it grounded in reality. Um, what was it like for you as the editor to kind of get to revel in that boy's adventure, but also have to kind of be the historian?
I hint at this in one footnote, in one line. I first read Kim when I was 12,
Yeah, yeah.
and I'm 81 now, and I don't know how many times I've read it, but every once in a while I have nothing to read. Oh, I'm going to read Kim again. I mean, if you haven't read Kim, folks, read Kim. I'm afraid most 12-year-olds today probably would have trouble with it, but it's the best book for a 12-year-old boy you can imagine. And I'm still finding great stuff in there. You know, Kipling is thought of as this racist imperialist and whatnot. He's got a line in Kim where one of the white, you know, folks says something about the Hindus, and Kim's line is Christianity, the religion that dismisses the beliefs of 90% of humanity as heathen.
Yeah.
That is not racist. That is globalist,
Yeah.
Anyway, when I started reading this, I reverted to my 12-year-old, this kid's having this great adventure. I mean, wouldn't you like to be with Fred? Tagging along with Fred? It'd be like, with Huck, on the
Yeah.
raft.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah,
That's kind of what I thought. That's a Tom
yeah,
Sawyer Huck Finn kind of thing.
yeah. It's a shame that Fred never actually sat down and said, I'm going to write, I'm going to gather some documents and help me to write, a fuller account of what I was doing. And in one of his letters home, Grant, the real Grant, says to Julia, he's keeping a diary. Fred's keeping a diary. I don't know if he had it or lost it or whatnot, but if he had the diary, that would have made a marvelous book.
Yeah.
I mean, if he kept the spirit going. But here he is, he's under fire. He's taking part in battles. I mean, there's one scene, literally, he's riding with his father and his staff. And this is during the 5 days battles, where they have 4 major battles in 5 days, before they bottle pembered him up. He's riding with his father. The battle is supposed to move away, and suddenly they come under fire. Everybody else is pulling back, and Grant spurs his horse in the direction, so everybody follows, including Fred. And then with their escort, they form a skirmish line, and then troops come up. But Fred is there, in the skirmish line. He doesn't say how many times he was under fire, but you can sort of guess it's at least 5 or 6 times,
Right.
Yeah, it's just this great child's adventure.
Wow. The book is Fred Grant at Vicksburg, edited by Albert Nofi. Al, I've enjoyed chatting with you today about this. Thank you so much for sharing.
I got enthusiastic about this book,
Yeah.
and it also gave me some tips. I've been writing a column for North and South on, I call it forgotten civil warriors. People who today, they actually may be well known even today, but if you look up like their biography or something, it says during the Civil War he served the Union, and so curiosity, led me to start looking at people, and I said, my God, it's the same. It's the same with the World War II generation is passing, right?
Right.
Now we're getting obits mentioning guys' service. 20 years ago, when guys like Bill Blass died, one line in his biography, in World War II, served in the Army. Bill Blass was in the Ghost Army. He spent 6 months on the front, at the front, fooling the Germans. One line, he was in the Army. So, I mean, I like to collect people. I got literally hundreds of names now of people with interesting little stories. Some of them you just can't find anything out about. So, but I got a bunch of names that I'm going to continue, and maybe I'll have another book out of it.
That'd be fantastic. Well, thanks for being with us today, Al. I appreciate it.
Thank you for having me.
So I'm Chris Mikowski for the Emerging Civil War podcast. Thanks for being with us. We'll see you online and on the battlefield.
So long, folks. Take care.